If you, like so many high-level language learners, have felt that frustrating gap between passing a formal grammar exam and actually holding your own in a quick, natural, everyday conversation, then this deep dive is definitely for you.
Yeah, it's that feeling, isn't it? You can ace the written rules, but then someone speaks casually and suddenly it feels like the system just collapses.
Exactly. Why does that happen?
Well, today we think we can provide some answers. We're looking at two seemingly quite different areas of knowledge. On one hand, we've got some really foundational linguistic work.
David Crystal and Derek Davies' analysis, right?
Yeah.
Based on that amazing archive of recordings at University College London.
That's the one. Raw, real life, totally unscripted speech from back in the 70s. They captured how people really talked, warts and all, nothing omitted.
And then, on the other hand, we're pairing this sort of historical linguistic snapshot with some really interesting modern academic research on emotional knowledge, or EK.
hmm Especially how EK applies in high-pressure situations like teaching or learning or really any intense interpersonal communication.
So the big question we're asking is, what's the connection? What's the shared DNA between having a really effective conversation and having, well, emotional intelligence?
Our mission today is really to go way beyond the textbook. We want to focus on all that stuff traditional teaching often dismisses, calls it noise or just plain mistakes.
We're diving into the hidden conversational code of natural, everyday English, focusing on those three key things: fluency, intelligibility, and the one that can really trip you up, appropriateness.
And we're going to argue pretty strongly, I think, that emotional insight, that EK is actually the engine driving all three.
Okay, before we really jump in, though, we probably need to be clear about the scope here. Crystal and Davy were incredibly careful about their source material, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely meticulous. They weren't studying formal speeches or, stiff job interviews.
Right.
They were looking at extremely relaxed, friendly conversations, chats between people who knew each other really well.
Often about quite emotionally charged stuff, too, looking at the transcript.
Yes, exactly. And crucially, there was no pressure on the speakers to kind of monitor their language or sound proper.
And that distinction is, it's everything, isn't it?
It really is. Because in those relaxed conditions, native speakers just naturally use omissions, slang, structures that seem, well, loose, things that would get a big red cross next to them in a formal essay. And we really have to stress the normality of these features. This isn't bad English. It's the standard way people communicate naturally.
And failing to use them correctly or using them inappropriately is actually more jarring to a native speaker than, say, getting a verb tense wrong.
Way more jarring. It flags you as other much more quickly.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more. So if you spent years mastering things like conditional clauses, passive voice, all that complex grammar, why does a simple chat about the weather or last night's football game suddenly leave you feeling like you're completely lost? What is the biggest stumbling block for people who are, technically really good at English?
Well, it really comes down to those three pillars of conversational success that Crystal and Davy identified from analyzing all that data from the survey of English usage.
Right.
If a learner is failing to sound natural, it's usually because they haven't quite mastered one of these three: fluency, intelligibility, or appropriateness.
Okay, let's take fluency first. I think most people hear fluency and just think speaking fast. But it's more nuanced than that, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge oversimplification. The researchers define fluency not really by speed, but by the smoothness of continuity in the conversation.
Smoothness of continuity.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It's about how seamlessly you move from one idea, one sentence to the next. It involves varying your sentence structure naturally, yes, but crucially, it relies on mastering those little bits of speech that native speakers actually leave out.
The conversational shortcuts.
Yeah.
Like what? Can you give us an example of a common omission that shows fluency?
Sure. Think about subject elision. We'll probably talk more about this later in the grammar bit. But instead of saying very formally, "Did you see Susie last night?" a fluent speaker in a relaxed context might just say, "See Susie last night."
Right. The did you is just implied by the context and the intonation.
Exactly. The context makes the meaning clear, and leaving it out makes the exchange quicker, smoother, and it signals that relaxed familiarity. So, fluency, in a way, is shown by knowing what you don't need to say.
Okay. Pillar 2, intelligibility. That sounds a bit more straightforward.
It is, relatively speaking. Intelligibility is basically about whether people can recognize your words and sentence patterns. It mostly comes down to your phonetic character. Can the listener actually distinguish your vowels and consonants well enough to understand the individual words you're saying?
So if people understand you word for word, you've basically ticked the intelligibility box.
Pretty much. It's kind of the baseline requirement, you know? You have to be understood at that level.
But the whole thing seems to rest on that third pillar, doesn't it? Appropriateness.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that one considered so much harder to get right? And why do mistakes there carry such sort of heavy social penalties?
Appropriateness. This is the big one. It's all about the suitability of your language to the situation. Meaning the context, the relationship you have with the person you're talking to, the topic you're discussing, even the sort of emotional temperature of the room at that moment.
Okay.
And the findings from the research here are, well, they're quite stark, actually. Native speakers are incredibly forgiving of mistakes in basic grammar or vocabulary. They get it. That's hard when you're learning a language.
Right. They expect learners to make those kinds of errors.
But when you fail at appropriateness, the judgment is completely different.
How so?
Well, the source material is really clear on this. Native speakers are less likely to excuse lapses in appropriateness. Things like using the wrong tone of voice or being too formal or too informal for the situation. In fact, they might actually see such a mistake not just as a linguistic slip-up, but as evidence of a, and this is the quote, personal or psychological fault in the speaker.
Wow. That's a really critical point. So if I accidentally use a tone that sounds, I don't know, demanding or rude, even if my grammar is perfect, I'm not being judged on my prepositions. I'm being judged on my character. It sounds like I haven't grasped the basic social rules of the conversation.
That's precisely it. It's the difference between someone thinking, oh, he made a mistake with that verb tense, versus them thinking, wow, he's a fundamentally rude person.
Okay.
If you mess up grammar, it's a linguistic error. If you mess up appropriateness, it can feel like a failure in social awareness. And this is where that emotional knowledge framework starts to become immediately relevant, isn't it?
Because to get appropriateness right, you have to have some emotional insight into yourself and into the other person.
Exactly. You need to read the situation, read the person. And this focus on social awareness brings us directly to maybe the most dangerous and often completely unconscious element of spoken English. Prosody, or, intonation, rhythm, stress.
Right.
The music of the language.
Right, the how you say it, not just the what.
Precisely. And the sources really stress this. Mistakes in intonation are the absolute hardest for native speakers to overlook.
Why is that?
Because fundamentally, we assume that in spoken language, people sound the way they intend to sound. We take intonation as a direct signal of meaning and attitude.
So we just automatically assume that a rising tone means a question or maybe uncertainty? A sharp tone means irritation. We don't consciously process it usually?
Exactly. So if a learner uses a tone that completely clashes with their intended meaning, maybe they're trying to be polite, but they sound abrupt, the listener instinctively trusts the tone over the actual words.
And that's the unconscious brick dropping you mentioned.
That's the perfect definition. You're dropping a social brick, potentially offending someone or confusing them without even realizing you're doing it.
Could you give that example from the linguists again? The one about the foreigner?
Yeah, it's a great illustration. So imagine a non-native speaker, maybe highly intelligent, talking about a really interesting topic, but they inappropriately use a low rising tone throughout.
Okay, a low rising tone. What does that typically signal in English?
Well, depending on context, it can sound a bit dismissive or self-satisfied, maybe even a little challenging or arrogant. It lacks finality.
So the listener hears interesting words, maybe valuable insights, but their internal reaction is something like, that person has some interesting things to say, but gosh, they sound so arrogant about it all.
Exactly. The perceived arrogance comes purely from the mismatch in prosody. Not the content, not the grammar, just the tune.
And that's why Crystal and Davy argued that getting rid of this kind of brick droppings should be a primary goal when teaching conversation.
Absolutely. Because it's the fastest way to create a psychological barrier between you and the person you're talking to. It undermines trust and rapport instantly.
Okay, so let's dig into what natural speech actually sounds like, according to those detailed transcripts. How do native speakers use prosody, these subtle shifts, to communicate meaning and emotion?
Well, they found a whole arsenal of techniques, often very subtle, that go way beyond just shouting to emphasize something.
Like what?
For subtle emphasis, speakers would often use a drawled initial consonant.
A drawled consonant. You mean stretching it out.
Yeah, almost unconsciously lengthening the very first sound of an important word. Like if you really enjoyed something, you might say it was LL lovely, stretching that L sound slightly.
Ah, okay. Not louder, just longer. To signal deep approval, or maybe even irony sometimes.
Exactly, it adds that layer of meaning. They also noted sudden, quite marked jumps in pitch.
Higher pitch.
Yeah, often to signal that you're introducing a completely new topic or something significant. They saw this in the transcripts when a speaker shifts gear, maybe introduces something quite sensitive or emotionally charged, like that phrase, pocky bashing.
So the pitch jump acts like a kind of mental flag,
Yeah.
saying, pay attention, this is important, may be difficult.
Precisely. The prosody is doing social work there. It's managing the risk of introducing a potentially difficult topic.
Fascinating. What about managing the flow? Like when someone's hesitating, trying to remember something, we all use fillers like and ooh. But did they find more specific markers in the transcripts?
Oh, definitely. Hesitation is clearly managed. It's not just random noise. The little interjection, oh, often appeared just before a speaker made a definite statement, almost like giving themselves half a second to confirm their thought.
Like a little mental pause button.
Kind of. But
Oh.
what's really revealing is the use of what you might call non-numerical placeholders.
Sorry?
When a speaker couldn't remember an exact number or figure, they wouldn't just trail off. They'd often insert a specific colloquial marker of vagueness, saying something like X or N in place of the forgotten number.
So instead of saying about 50 quid, they might say about N quid.
Something like that, yeah. It's like a verbal shrug, isn't it? It signals, I know a number goes here, I should know it, but I can't retrieve it right now. It maintains the flow better than just silence.
And I remember reading the notes, they even transcribed one hesitation sound that was described as something like more a belch than a hesitation.
Chuckles slightly. Yes, that level of detail really shows how unfiltered the data was, doesn't it? How utterly natural and unself-conscious these conversations were.
It really does. It highlights that conversation is, well, quite physical sometimes.
Very physical, and the emotional signaling is deeply embedded in that physicality. For instance, when speakers were expressing disparagement or strong disapproval, the analysts noted a distinct shift to a husky tone of voice.
Husky, like breathy.
Yeah, sort of breathy, slightly rough quality. They noted it when someone was describing, say, the shockingly bad performance of a football team.
So that husky tone immediately flags negative judgment for the listener.
It seems to, yes. And what about really intense, forceful emotion, like disgust?
Yeah.
For those really strong feelings, especially disgust or a powerful negative reaction, they documented what they called glissando pitch movement.
Glissando, like sliding on a musical instrument.
Exactly like that. A forceful, sliding, or gliding pitch change across a key word. So a speaker describing pigs as absolutely revolting wouldn't just say the word flatly. They'd use this dramatic sliding pitch movement across the word revolting to convey the sheer intensity of their feeling.
Wow, making the word itself almost an event.
And similarly, when someone was recounting a really dramatic experience, like being caught in that terrible crush at the football ground mentioned in one extract,
Yes.
their speech naturally used a much wider pitch range overall. They used more marked glissando movements, and often their speaking speed increased as they got towards the climax of the story.
So the prosody is painting the scene emotionally. It's pulling the listener into the drama.
Absolutely. It ensures the listener is right there with them, feeling the tension.
The lesson seems crystal clear then. You can know the dictionary definition of revolting. You can use it in a grammatically perfect sentence, but if you say it with a flat, neutral intonation,
You haven't actually conveyed the real emotional weight of the word at all. You've missed the core message. Okay, so shifting from the sound, the prosody, to the structure, let's talk about why those transcriptions of natural, informal chat look so, well, messy compared to written English.
right, they're full of stuff that would get corrected in an essay.
Exactly. And the reason is pretty simple. Informal speech prioritizes real-time communication efficiency. It's about getting the message across quickly and smoothly in the moment, not about adhering perfectly to the rules we learn for planned, structured, written English.
It's fundamentally a different system, operating under completely different pressures and goals. Let's start with the vocabulary, the tools people use, the colloquialisms.
Yeah, informal English is incredibly rich with colloquialisms. These are often colorful, very concise replacements for more formal terms. In the extracts, we see things like herring out,
meaning running really fast like a hare.
Exactly. Or using simple punchy verbs like shove instead of push hard or pinch instead of steal. They're just faster, more vivid, and they really enhance that sense of shared understanding and familiarity.
And then there are the intensifiers and exclamations, which often seem to get almost all their meaning from the prosody we were just talking about.
Totally. Take a mild exclamation like core. It's
Yeah.
probably shortened form of God, right? Used to express surprise or maybe mild appreciation, but its actual meaning in any instance depends almost entirely on the tone and pitch you use,
Right. It could be genuine surprise or sarcastic or impressed.
all conveyed by the tune. And then, of course, there's the big one, the granddaddy of British colloquial intensifiers.
Ah, yes. The analysis noted that as the most common intensifier in their data.
It was, by far. And this is crucial, it comes with a massive social health warning attached.
A very necessary warning label.
Absolutely essential. The researchers explicitly caution foreign learners, use bloody with extreme care. Only use it if you're absolutely sure you're in a situation of established familiarity, or I suppose if you actually intend to sound strongly offensive.
This perfectly illustrates the main point, doesn't it? Using a grammatically simple intensifier like bloody inappropriately is a massive social failure. It shows you haven't grasped the control of English culture patterns, as they put it.
It's a catastrophic appropriateness failure, far worse than a grammar slip.
Okay, moving on to syntax, the sentence structure. The most striking thing in spoken English is how systematic the shortcuts are, the omissions, the inversions. Let's talk about concord first, that basic agreement between subject and verb.
Right. Well, colloquial English often shows what looks like a lack of concord, especially when people are listing things quickly. Formally, we'd always say, there were many things. But a relaxed speaker, maybe listing who they saw somewhere, might naturally say there was, even when followed by plural subjects, like there was Susie and John and the kids.
Why does that happen, do you think?
It seems like the immediacy of producing the speech, maybe focusing on the first item in the list, overrides the more complex grammatical rule that requires looking ahead to the plural subject. It's spontaneous.
And that subject elision we touched on earlier, leaving out the subject and maybe the auxiliary verb because the listener obviously knows who or what you mean.
Yes, that's a huge marker of shared context and intimacy. It assumes knowledge. If you and I are standing looking at my dirty car, I might just say, needs washing.
Instead of the full, my car needs washing or it needs washing.
Exactly. Or if we're planning a day out, maybe just see Susie instead of shall we go and see Susie? Or you'd see Susie then. It's all about efficiency built on shared understanding. Social awareness allows for linguistic shortcuts.
I love the examples they found of pronoun clarification and inversion where the sentence structure feels almost back to front compared to written English.
Ah, yes. Those are fascinating glimpses into how we construct sentences on the fly when we haven't planned the whole thing out.
So instead of a neat subject-verb-object sentence like, the pigs were terrible,
A speaker might start talking before the subject is fully formed in their mind and say something like, they were terrible, the pigs.
the they is like a placeholder uttered first, and then they clarify who they are, the pig.
Exactly, or that slightly more complex rearrangement. The fireworks themselves we have a little store of.
Okay, break that one down.
Well, the object, the fireworks themselves, is pulled right to the front of the sentence for emphasis, probably because that's what the speaker is thinking about most prominently at that moment. It completely disrupts the standard subject-verb-object order.
It reflects the speaker's immediate focus, not a pre-planned grammatical sequence. That single phenomenon perfectly captures the difference between writing, which tends to be linear and planned, and speaking, which is often corrective, immediate, and emphasizes what's mentally salient right now.
Couldn't agree more. Which brings us to maybe the most revealing little moment of real-time speech production captured in the data. That amazing instance of went go.
Ah, yes. Went go. What was happening there?
Well, the speaker was mid-sentence and they hesitated. The analysis suggests they were probably caught in a moment of cognitive dissonance, caught between the past tense context of the conversation they were in and their own impulse to describe something that felt more like a present habit or an anticipated future action.
So the brain sort of fused the two impulses, past went and base go.
That's the theory. The result was this unique blend. They all went go. It's like a tiny cognitive stutter caught on tape, showing the speaker actively negotiating tense choice live in the moment.
And the fact that another native speaker would likely understand what was meant by went go, but would instantly recognize it as highly informal, maybe even a slip of the tongue.
That just emphasizes the point perfectly. We're dealing with a spectrum of informality here.
It's not one single system called informal English?
Not at all. It's a range, a continuum.
Yeah.
And speakers control where they are on that spectrum. You can take a perfectly neutral, grammatically standard sentence and make it just slightly informal by slotting in one colloquial word, like shove.
Mm.
You can make it more informal by adding subject elision. You can go further with inversions and maybe even the occasional went, go. And having control over that range, knowing how to modulate your English depending on the context, the relationship, the topic, that is the real definition of having mastery over English culture patterns.
Okay, let's make the connection explicit now.
Yeah.
We've established that messing up in spoken English, especially with tone or formality, appropriateness is often perceived not just as a language mistake, but as that personal or psychological fault.
Which implies that mastering conversation isn't just about language rules, it demands social and emotional insight.
So how does this modern framework of emotional knowledge, EK, help us understand this better? How does it help us potentially fix the problem?
Well, the link, I think, lies in this concept of total attunement.
Attunement.
Yeah. The linguistic researchers, Crystal and Davy, concluded that for foreign learners to really succeed in natural conversation, they need to be totally in tune with the behavior, language patterns, and presuppositions of the person they're talking to and the whole social situation.
Okay, being in tune.
And that state of being in tune is precisely what emotional knowledge, EK, defines, measures, and helps us develop.
So if the conversation turns to something stressful, maybe those news reports about gang violence mentioned in the transcripts, or that really harrowing personal account of the football stadium crush, your linguistic skill alone isn't enough if you lack the sort of emotional machinery to navigate that high-stakes interaction appropriately.
That's exactly it. EK is seen as knowledge that gets actively transformed from just general knowledge when someone finds themselves dealing with situations that are intrinsically emotional.
Okay.
And the framework provides a really neat structure for this machinery. It breaks it down into 4 crucial clusters or groups of skills that govern both our internal state and how we interact externally. These are basically the building blocks for achieving appropriateness.
Right. Let's break down those 4 clusters then, and let's try and apply them directly to someone learning English, trying to sound natural.
Okay. We can broadly categorize them into internal skills and external or social skills.
Yep.
The internal ones are self-awareness and self-management.
Okay, self-awareness first, EK1.
Self-awareness, EK1. This is basically your ability to know your own internal states, to recognize your emotions as they happen, understand your strengths and weaknesses, know your own intuitions. It includes things like emotional awareness, accurate self-assessment.
And how does that help a language learner in conversation?
It's fundamental for controlling your delivery. If you're aware that you're feeling tense, or maybe overexcited, or perhaps a bit defensive, you can then consciously manage your prosody, your tone, your pitch, your rhythm.
Ah, so you can stop yourself from unintentionally using that husky tone that signals disparagement, or that low-rising pitch that sounds arrogant just because you're feeling a bit stressed.
Exactly. It's your first line of defense against that unconscious brick dropping, knowing what you actually sound like and knowing what emotional state you might be projecting through your voice.
Got it. And the second internal cluster?
That's the active application of that awareness. Self-management, EK2. This is knowing how to control your impulses, manage your emotional resources, and adapt your performance. This cluster covers things like emotional self-control, transparency, which we'll come back to, adaptability, and things like initiative.
So this determines whether you can keep your cool during a tricky discussion, or avoid that kind of cognitive stutter, like the went-go example, by managing your thought process better under pressure.
Precisely. It's about managing your internal state so it doesn't derail your communication.
Okay, now the external, the social side.
Right. That starts with social awareness, EK3.
Right.
This is all about understanding other people's feelings, needs, and concerns. The big component here is empathy, but it also includes things like organizational awareness, understanding the currents in a group.
And this is the absolute cornerstone of appropriateness, isn't it?
Totally. Can you read the room? Can you pick up on the subtle cues? Can you perceive the other speaker's stress or excitement through their pitch changes or their hesitations? This awareness tells you instantly what level of formality is okay, whether a joke would land well, whether you need to soften your tone.
It's the reading the situation skill.
And finally, putting all that awareness into action. Relationship management, EK4.
EK4.
This is about knowing how to handle relationships effectively, how to inspire people, influence them, manage conflict, work in a team. In a dynamic conversation, this is how you manage the flow back and forth, how you negotiate whose turn it is to speak, how you might subtly steer the topic, and crucially, how you ensure that if a disagreement comes up, maybe you don't agree the pigs were revolting,
Chuckles.
it gets handled smoothly without damaging the relationship or stopping the conversation dead.
Okay, this is where it gets really practical. Looking at those 4 clusters, the research you mentioned found something interesting about one specific component of self-management transparency, EK2B. It was reported as the highest self-assessed skill and also the easiest one for people to understand. Why is this particular quality, this honesty, this congruence, so highly valued in communication?
That's a great question. Transparency is essentially about maintaining integrity. It's about making sure that your external actions, what you say and do, align perfectly with your internal values and beliefs. You are who you appear to be.
Being authentic.
Being authentic, yes. And it seems to be the absolute key to earning trust and respect from people you interact with, including conversational partners. The behaviors that demonstrate transparency range from quite basic things like, at level 4, simply keeping your promises up, to quite challenging things like level 2, being willing to publicly admit your mistakes.
Okay, and connecting that back to the language learner, if we revisit that idea of linguistic mistakes being perceived as a personal or psychological fault, transparency seems like the perfect antidote. If my underlying intention is honest and congruent, even if my grammar slips up or I choose the wrong word.
People are more likely to give you the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly. You're
Yeah.
perceived as trustworthy.
I think that's right. If a learner uses a phrase incorrectly, but their overall demeanor, their tone, their prosody comes across as congruent and transparently honest and well-intentioned, the native speaker is much more likely to just excuse the linguistic mistake. They see it as an effort, a learning error, rather than jumping to conclusions about arrogance or insincerity.
So being transparent actually reduces the risk that a simple language error will be misinterpreted as a character flaw.
Yes, it provides a kind of buffer of goodwill.
Okay. And then on the social awareness side, the other key tool we highlighted was empathy, EK3A. This seems absolutely fundamental for achieving that total attunement we talked about, for reading the room.
Oh, completely fundamental. Empathy is your ability to interpret and respond appropriately to the emotional state of the other person. Without it, achieving appropriateness is basically impossible. You're flying blind.
And the source material had that lovely analogy describing empathy as being like a person's ability to read.
Yes, I like that too. It's not a fixed trait. You either have it or you don't. It's a skill, like reading, that exists on different levels, and importantly, it can be actively developed with practice and attention.
So what are those different levels of reading your conversational partner's emotions?
Well, the framework suggests it starts at a foundational level, maybe level 4, which is simply being a good listener, really paying attention, actively focusing on what the other person is saying and how they're saying it.
Okay, basic active listening.
Then it progresses up to level 3, which is absolutely crucial for the kind of advanced communication we're talking about, the ability to read nonverbal cues.
So picking up on the prosody, interpreting those subtle shifts, the hesitation fillers, the husky tone meaning disapproval, the pitch jumps signaling importance or topic change.
Exactly, reading the music, not just the words. And then the highest level, level 1, is described as seeing things from others' perspectives, genuinely being able to step into their shoes and understand their viewpoint, even if you don't agree with it.
So empathy is like the internal scanner. It's the mechanism that allows the speaker to actually process all those external signals, the prosody, the body language, that the linguists identified as being so important.
That's a great way to put it. A skilled conversationalist, using empathy, listens not just to the words revolting, but hears the glissando pitch movement across the word, recognizes it signals strong disgust, and then adapts their own response accordingly. Maybe they acknowledge the strength of feeling, maybe they soften their own opposing view.
There was a quote from one of the mentors in that EK study, wasn't there? Summing up empathy.
Yes, they said empathy is being able to read their emotions and how they're going to respond to you, how they're going to react to you, and in turn, how you should respond to. It's that constant feedback loop.
Read the other person, anticipate their reaction, adjust your own communication.
Exactly. And that feedback loop, driven by emotional knowledge and processed through empathy, is what ensures your fluency stays smooth, avoids awkward clashes, and crucially, ensures your appropriateness is constantly monitored and adjusted to fit the evolving social context.
It really transforms language learning, doesn't it? from just a task of memorizing grammar rules and vocabulary into a much more dynamic process of social negotiation and emotional intelligence. Hashtag tag outro.
So, if we try and synthesize these two bodies of work, the detailed linguistic analysis of real conversation and the framework of emotional knowledge, what's the big takeaway?
Well, it seems that achieving true mastery in spoken English, that natural fluency and appropriateness, is fundamentally a blended discipline. It's not just linguistics, and it's not just emotional skill.
Exactly. Linguistic mastery, knowing the grammar, the vocabulary, the sounds, that provides the basic tools you need for fluency and intelligibility. But it's that deeper social and emotional insight, the EK, that really secures appropriateness.
And the biggest challenge for learners seems to be realizing that the code of natural conversation relies heavily on all those shortcuts, omissions, and especially those crucial emotional signals carried by prosody things that formal language instruction often completely ignores or even discourages.
They're seen as messy when actually they're essential.
So what does this all mean for you, the advanced learner, listening right now, striving for that truly natural-sounding English?
Well, I think it means you might need to shift your focus slightly in your learning and practice. Move beyond purely linguistic analysis, important as that is, and start incorporating more conscious, emotional, and social observation.
Paying attention to the how as much as the what.
Precisely. That internal work, developing your self-awareness, EK1, so you know how you're feeling and sounding, and your self-management, EK2, so you can control your delivery and maintain transparency that's essential to avoid those prosodic errors that get misinterpreted as arrogance or insincerity.
Right. Managing yourself first.
And then the external work, honing your social awareness, EK3, especially empathy, so you can accurately read the situation and the other person, and developing your relationship management, EK4 skills, to navigate the interaction smoothly. That's what allows you to correctly judge when to use colloquialisms, what level of syntactic informality is okay, and critically, what tone of voice is appropriate for that specific moment with that specific person.
So the ultimate measure of conversational mastery isn't just grammatical accuracy. It's developing that sort of intuitive awareness, that genuine feeling for how much informality, how much emotional expression is required and tolerated in any given situation.
And that knowledge, that feeling, you won't find it neatly listed in a dictionary or a grammar textbook. It's something that's constantly being constructed and refined through real interaction, and it's powered by your developing emotional intelligence.
So maybe the challenge of mastering spoken English is less about searching for the single perfect grammatical structure for every situation.
And much more about achieving that state of total attunement, as Crystal and Dady called it. That state where your linguistic choices, your prosody, your overall expression are perfectly congruent with your actual emotional intention and also meet your conversational partner's social expectations for that context.
It's a tall order, but it feels like a much more complete picture of what real communication involves.
It does.
So we really encourage you to try and apply some of this right away. Next time you're listening to someone speaking English informally, maybe a native speaker friend, or even on a podcast or TV show, try to consciously stop focusing only on the vocabulary they're using.
Listen deeper.
Yeah, listen deeper. Listen specifically for those prosodic signals we talked about. Can you hear any drawled consonants? Any sudden pitch jumps? Can you spot those moments of managed hesitation, maybe using O or even an N?
And as you hear them, try using your newfound knowledge of emotional knowledge to interpret what unspoken emotional cues might be underneath. Ask yourself, does this person sound transparent? Am I successfully reading the emotional temperature of this conversation? And on the flip side, when I speak, am I sure I'm not unintentionally dropping one of those social bricks?
It's about becoming a more conscious listener and therefore a more attuned speaker.
Exactly. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the conversational code.
We hope it's given you some new ways to think about fluency and naturalness. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.